Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Late Production Tiger 1. Since the last video update, the model suspension is complete, the wheels have been mounted, and also the lower hull detailing has been completed as well. We will be going over these details and additions in this video. Before the tank can get its base coat of dark yellow, I need to first assemble the final drives. Final drive on this side here is already assembled, just to show the viewer exactly what it looks like. Now, the final drives have pretty much stayed exactly the same since Armortek's first kits, and the reason for that is because they nailed it on the first round. These final drives are very durable and are the type of things that once assembled are the things you never have to worry about. As I mentioned in some of my other videos, the final drives are basically the same throughout all of the Armortek models, from their Panther to the Sherman to their Tigers. They consist of a all-solid CNC'd aluminum final drive hub, a CNC'd steel gear, a set of ball bearings, and a rubberized seal. One relative new addition to the final drive assembly is that of a pre-cut gasket. This gasket I first encountered on their 2009 release King Tiger, and it's a very nice addition to the final drive assembly. This final drive here, as I mentioned, is already pre-assembled, and I will assemble this one here in real time just to show the ease of assembly. The only modification that I made to the setup was I removed a small little burr that was on the final drive gear itself. Because of the way the things are fabricated, there's a small tiny little burr that is on the tip center of the final drive gear. Now, this burr, I always just like to remove it on my own builds. However, if you leave it, it has absolutely no effect on the performance or the mounting of the final drive. Just removing the burr is just something I like to do, just to square everything off. As I mentioned before, I will be assembling this final drive in real time, just to show the ease of construction of the unit. First, before I can start assembling, the first thing I'm going to install is a rubberized little gasket. This gasket will fit into this small little rim here that is machined into the unit. Also, if we notice, before I start, the final drive casing itself has been primed in primer gray. This is one feature that I like to do on my builds. To insert the piece, I like to insert it with the rim pointing up like this. I line it up into the groove, and then with a piece of dowel from an old furniture, as well as a rubber mallet, I like to press the piece into the hole. And it'll simply go in. Once the piece is fully seated, it is then time to install the bearings. Now, the bearings, I quickly hit it with a shot of air to make sure there's no debris on them. I first line up the one on the inside. Make sure it's nice and lined up so that when you hit it with the mallet, it seats in properly. You want to seat it in so it's nice and flush. And do the same thing to the reverse side. Once the piece is in, you don't have to worry about them ever falling out. Now that the unit has its bearings, it is then time to add the lubrication to the final drive gear itself. For lubrication, I like to use this type of grease here, high temperature grease. However, I've also used marine grease in the past. Both are suffice in lubricating the final drive gear. Now, just with a smear of a finger, I go ahead and apply the grease to the final drive gear itself. After the gear is thoroughly lubed, I simply just insert it into the final drive as such, and the final drive is now assembled. With both final drives now assembled, I can now mount them to the tank. Once they are mounted to the tank, the lower hull can then progress. With the final drives assembled, they will now be installed to the vehicle. If we notice, the vehicle's underbelly has all been primed with its base coat of primer gray. Once the final drives are fitted, the entire lower chassis will receive its base coat of dark yellow. Before I can go ahead and mount on the final drives, I needed to go ahead and install the universal motor mount. The reason why you install the universal motor mount before the final drives is because the location on these Armorteks for the universal motor mount, these fastener locations are encased and covered up by the final drive once it is installed. So it is imperative to install the motor mount before the final drive. To get an idea on what the motor mount looks like, here goes the model from inside the vehicle. As you can see, the motor mounts are two large circular discs and are reminiscent of the large brake drums which are found on the real tank. However, these motor mounts here their purpose is to firmly affix the geared motor to the side hull. These motor mounts are very effective and are very strong and durable. They are made out of a solid piece of CNC'd aluminum like the rest of the parts on the model. They simply bolt on with the supplied holes and are pre-threaded and mount on with ease. The mounts themselves, once they're installed, they don't need to come out again, so it's imperative to use a very high-strength thread lock to make sure that the mount is, once affixed, stays affixed. One part of the lower hull that is worth of mentioning is the model's bump stops. The Tiger 1 kit features 4 of these bump stops that are fixed to the hull in the same locations there are on the real one. The purpose of these bump stops is to prevent the suspension arm from over swinging and causing the lower hull to bottom out on rough terrain. Like I mentioned before, these are found on the real vehicle, and these bump stops themselves are a relatively new addition to the Armortek kit. The original Armortek kit that came out in 2002-2003 timeframe had these 3 holes pre-drilled into the model side hull. However, the bumps themselves were not included. The inclusion of these pieces are a nice touch and are very durable and are a solid piece of kit, and they will function as well as they would on the real one. They are a low profile, which will prevent any snagging of the track or of any obstacles that the track might kick up. And if they are hit, they are very durable and won't rip off anytime soon. As nice as the Armortek piece is, the client did request to have them replaced with an aftermarket set of detailed bump stops from the following vendor listed below. These bump stops here are all casted out of brass and are extremely detailed and extremely nicely done. If we notice, they all have their casting numbers on them and assembled just like the real one with fasteners. The rubber is real rubber and will also serve the same function as the kit version. As for installation, if we notice, the aftermarket one is slightly bigger than the Armortek version, and because of that, the holes don't necessarily line up. It's a simple fix. You just have to mount it. The way I'm going to fix it to the model is I'm going to use the top hole as the mounting point, and then I'm just going to mark and drill out the 2 other locations for the other fasteners. By doing this, the bump stop will cover the other 2 holes, and so putting in and filling in the holes isn't necessarily needed. Here we have the model with the kit supplied bump stops fitted, and to get an idea on what the model looks like with the aftermarket parts fitted, they look like this. As you can see, the new fitted pieces made very well with the Armortek hull, and now that they're installed, I can progress with the build. One thing as of note, when it comes to the installation of the bump stops, the supplied fasteners protrude slightly from the nuts when completed. Now, to prevent anything from snagging or striking the protrusions were eliminated via a Dremel with a cutting stone. I just simply cut them off and buff them down so that It's a nice smooth surface and really reduces the risk of anything snagging them. And here goes the lower hull with its base coat and its weathering added. Because of the wheels on these German tanks, it's really difficult to get to the lower hull once the wheels have been installed, which is why on all of my German tanks I always like to quickly weather the lower hull and the road wheels prior to wheel installation. This way, once everything is installed, the underhull is already pre-weathered, and I don't have to worry about getting to these hard-to-reach locations when it comes time to actually weather the rest of the model. Just like with the lower hull, the weathering was also applied to the road wheels themselves. On the inner road wheel, the weathering was added to both the front and the back. And on the outer road wheel, it was added to the inside and the rear. The purpose of adding the weathering now is just like with the lower hull. Once these wheels are assembled, getting to the inner wheel will be a lot more difficult than getting to the outer road wheel. So I went ahead and applied the basic weathering now, so that'll be a lot easier when the build progresses. Prior to adding the airbrush weathering, the road wheels themselves were all thoroughly cleaned. If we recall from the previous video, because of the fastener modification, there was flux as well as some other dirt and debris that was present on the road wheel. This dirt and debris is not desirable, so it was cleaned off via a rag with some turpentine, making for a nice smooth finish, which is then ready for me to apply the airbrush weathering. Now that the lower hull is painted, you can see more depth the detail that was added to the sponsons. The sponsons are, the way they come from the Armortek kit original, is you have the sponson plate, which is one continuous plate. On this plate, it's pre-bent to have the side fillet detail over here. The way it attaches to the model is via a few points in which fasteners secure the sponson to the side hull, and then there are some tabs bent into the aluminum plate, which is then how you connect it to the side hull. The Armortek securing system is very good and is very strong. When you assemble all the plates together, you will have a small seam running along the length of the plate. In addition to the small seam, you will also have small little gaps in sections of the sponson. These gaps are present where the plate has been laser cut and bent 90 degrees to form the little tab to where you would fasten the body panels together. Both the seams and the gaps were plugged up with the bodywork, as well as the well detail. As you can see, there is no trace of either the seam or the gapping left on the model. As for the rigidity angle brace that we have here, this plate is actually found on the Tiger 1s in this location. It is both welded and riveted to the tank. The Armortek kit, like I mentioned before, has this portion here of the fillet rail integral to the sponson plate. This is so that when you assemble the model out of the box, you will see this section through the road wheels, and that is a nice feature. In the past, this plate here was actually two pieces on the first run Armortek models. On the first run Armortek models, the sponson and the fillet plate were two separate pieces, in that you would first bolt the hull together, and then you would actually have a laser cut fillet strip, which would then be bolted to the tank. It was a nice feature, but to save on production time, they built it into the sponson plate. Since the fillet plate is built into the sponson plate, the top portion here is missing on the model. Now, this is not necessarily needed because this portion here is not really seen when the model is fully built. However, I added this little strip of detail here just to give the model more of a detailed punch. The fillet strip itself is made out of a strip of sheet styrene that has been cut and ground to have all of its fine little wavy pattern details affixed to it. In addition to having the plate cut, it was fused with the side angle plate or the side fillet plate here that was integral to the sponson plate, leaving for a nice seamless look. Finally, I added the rivet head detailing that was found on the real vehicle. The rivet detailing was added to both the top fillet plate and the side fillet plate. The Armortek kit does have the holes pre-laser cut into the side fillet plate, so affixing the rivets was a very easy procedure to do. After the plate was added, all the weld detail was sculpted to the... One last modification that I made to the fillet plate was the addition or the replacement of the standard Armortek cap screw. Armortek requires you to use a cap screw for this application over here. The cap screw itself is nice and strong and does hold the plates together very well. Also, the location that the screw is found in is not really able to be snagged by the track or any debris that the track might kick up. The reason why I replaced the cap screw with the button head screw that you see here is because the button head screw better blends in with the riveting detailing as opposed to the standard cap screw. Most likely I will plug up the small little Allen hole with some putty and body filler just to fully transform the button head screw into a rivet. The button head screw itself is the same exact dimensions as the cap screw and was a simple bait and switch. One bit of detailing that was missing on the stock Armortek kit was the large shock absorber peg or mounting bolt, which is found on both the rear and forwardmost torsion bar swing arm. On the real Tiger 1, there would be a very large shock absorber affixed to the inside of the vehicle, which would help distribute the weight of the heavy tank. Because of the way the shock absorber is fabricated there and how it's mounted inside the interior portion of the tank, there would be a large peg which would have been welded to the side hull plate. To fabricate the piece, I tooled up a resin plug set, and this plug set simply affixes to the Armortek model. This piece here is scaled for the Armortek and for the Armortek thickness of the plate. To install the piece, you simply drill the hole and you mount the piece from the inside. After the piece is mounted, you then add the sculpted welds. These nubs here are casted in resin and are listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. The nubs themselves are able to be fit to affix to any other 1/6 scale Tiger 1 that's on the market. Another modification that was made to the model was the modification of the fasteners, which affixes the lower hull pan to the body panels. The stock Armortek kit requires you to use hex bolts for this application on both the rear and front portion of the vehicle. To blend in the hull panel better, I replaced the hex bolts with countersunk fasteners that were the same dimensions. These countersunk fasteners were countersunked into the aluminum plate and then sanded flush. With the removal of these fasteners, the plate has a more realistic appearance and blends in better with the rest of the model. Now that the lower hull has its base coat and weathering added, it is now time to affix the road wheels. As we can see, the masking tape that was protecting the drive shafts have been removed and are now ready for the road wheel installation. Just prior to adding the road wheels, I go ahead and apply a quick smear grease to the exposed steel axles. The purpose of the grease has a bunch of benefits. First, it helps aiding with the wheel installation and helps them slide onto the axles a lot better. It also helps the wheels spin a lot easier, and on top of that, it also protects the steel from rust and corrosion as time goes on. So overall, applying the grease is a nice little tip to add whenever you're building an Armortek tank. One thing to keep in mind though is you don't want to go overboard with the grease, just a quick smear. And another thing to watch out for is not to apply any grease to the front portions here of the swing arms. This is because the road wheels are affixed to this swing arms via a single bolt. This bolt needs to have thread lock on it to prevent it from getting loose or from having it fall out over time. Because of this, you don't want to get any grease into the threads over here, as it will affect the way the Loctite or the thread lock will grip into the threads. Once you get your wheels on, I like to use a dowel rod to make sure that all the bearings are seated in. Once the bearings are properly seated in, the wheel will have a nice roll to it. In addition to using a dowel rod, you could also use the back end here of a center punch just to tap the bearing to make sure that they're properly seated. Once the bearings are properly seated, it is then time to apply the securing fasteners. Like I mentioned in the unboxing video, the wheels are secured to the axles via a fastener and a retaining washer. When the retaining washer is affixed to the fastener, I like to add a drop of Loctite to the threads, and then I simply bolt the fastener to the wheel. You don't want to over torque the fastener, but just get enough so it seats them properly. Once the fastener is properly seated, do the same procedure to the rest of the road wheels. The fastener, if you notice, does not spin, however the wheel does. This design really makes sure that the wheel stays nice in its place and rolls smoothly. This design has been used on all the Armortek tanks since the beginning and is very effective. One recent addition that I like that was made to the Armortek tanks is the hubcap design. On these tanks, I believe I mentioned this also in the unboxing video, there is a detail hubcap which threads over the hub that has its detail cap on it. The advantage about this system is that in case the off chance that fastener gets loose on you and falls out, it is retained inside that little cavity there and it won't fall out on you. On the original Armortek tanks, on the original Armortek Tiger releases, this detail didn't exist and the cap and the fastener screw was exposed. If that screw were to get loose on you and fall out, you would have to either track it down or replace it with a fresh one. However, if the chances of these fasteners coming off on you is very remote, especially if you properly use thread lock to retain the fastener to the shaft. Once the wheels are installed, the suspension is then complete. If installed properly, the wheels will have a very nice roll to them. And you can also test out the suspension at this phase as well. If you notice, the suspension is doing its job, it's articulating, while still letting the wheels roll smoothly. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale, late production Armortek Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.